My boyfriend's mother called me street garbage at Thanksgiving. She didn't know I controlled her entire shipping empire. Hi, my name is Ava Rowan. The moment the words left Vivienne Grant's mouth, my blood turned to ice. It wasn't the sentence itself. God knows. I've heard variations of, "You don't belong here," my entire life, but the way she said it, precise, elegant, deliberately enunciated, the way a surgeon might announce where the first incision will go, street garbage in a borrowed dress. The phrase floated across the Thanksgiving table like a poisoned ribbon, sweetly tied, meant to slice open everything I was trying so hard to keep intact. 25 guests, CEOs, senators, maritime partners, old money families whose surnames sat on museum wings, fell into a silence so heavy it felt like gravity had doubled. No fork moved, no glass clinked. Even the fireplace seemed to hesitate, its crackle dying to a faint ember glow, as if it too was waiting to witness my social execution. I felt every heartbeat slam against my ribs, not fast, but slow and punishing, like my own body wanted me to absorb the full weight of the moment. My fingers tightened around the linen napkin on my lap. Across the long mahogany table, Vivienne watched me with a look that was almost serene, as if she had finally aligned the universe in a way that made sense to her. Her eyes, those cold, immaculately trained eyes, held mine with the calm certainty of someone delivering a final verdict. There was no hesitation, no flicker of doubt. In that moment, she wasn't Elias's mother. She wasn't the hostess. She wasn't even human. She was an institution, the entire machinery of their world grinding down on a single conclusion. I did not belong. For a moment, no one breathed. The air inside the Grant dining hall felt dense enough to choke on, thick with discomfort, and the metallic tang of silence left too long unattended. I let that silence stretch just long enough for everyone to feel its weight pressing on their ribs before I finally exhaled. Slowly, almost delicately, I released the napkin from between my fingers. It landed on the edge of my plate like a feather settling into snow. No sudden movement, no gasp, no tears. Just a clean, deliberate act, as if I were placing the final piece of a puzzle only I could see. I lifted my chin and stood up, allowing the soft fabric of my allegedly borrowed dress to fall gracefully back into place. My legs were steady, surprisingly steady, considering the entire room was still vibrating with someone else's cruelty. And then, without warning, a smile curved gently at the corner of my lips. Not wide, not mocking, not broken. A small, serene, impossible smile. The kind of smile that makes people lean back without understanding why. I could feel 25 pairs of eyes trying to decode it, wondering whether it was defiance, delusion, or some secret they weren't privy to. The truth? Even I wasn't sure. All I knew was that it rose from a place strangely untouched by Vivienne's words, as though her voice hadn't pierced me at all but had instead skimmed across the surface of something far deeper and far older within me. When I finally spoke, my voice didn't tremble. If anything, it sounded quieter, rounded at the edges, softened by a strange kind of clarity. "Thank you," I said, each syllable measured, deliberate, floating gently into the room. "Thank you for showing me exactly where I stand in this family's eyes." A few guests flinched, as if the sentence itself was a blade passed politely across the table. And that was what unsettled them, the fact that I wasn't shouting or crying or dragging the tablecloth down with me. I was calm, too calm. Calm in the way a storm is calm just before lightning decides where to strike. Vivienne blinked, the faintest quiver in her expression betraying the first crack in her confidence. Perhaps she had expected a scene, an outburst she could control, twist, later recount to friends as proof of why people like me don't belong. But instead, she found herself facing something infinitely more dangerous: poise. She had thrown acid, and it had fallen on stone. Beside her, Elias's hand shot out under the table, reaching for mine, but I stepped back before he could catch me. The movement was subtle but unmistakable. His chair scraped as he stood up, panic flashing across his face. "Ava, wait please. Just wait." His voice cracked in a way that made several guests look away, either out of sympathy or shame. Perhaps both. I met his gaze, and for the first time that evening, my chest tightened not from humiliation, but from the quiet grief of understanding exactly what he was caught between. "Elias," I murmured, shaking my head, "no one should have to apologize on behalf of their mother." The sentence slid out gently, but its meaning landed like a stone dropped into a frozen lake. He opened his mouth to protest, but I didn't give him the chance. My fingers brushed his wrist, one soft, brief touch, and then slipped away. I could feel him wanting to hold on to that touch, to anchor himself to me the way he always did when the room became too heavy. But tonight I couldn't be his anchor. Tonight I had to be my own. I stepped back from the table. My heels sank slightly into the antique rug, and the ornate chandelier above us cast trembling reflections along the polished wood floor. I didn't rush. I didn't apologize. I simply walked, my heartbeat steady, my spine straight, my breath even as if I were leaving a meeting that had simply run its course. Chairs shifted awkwardly as people leaned back to make space for me to pass. Some lowered their eyes. Others watched openly, caught between fascination and discomfort. But not a single person spoke. Not one. By the time I reached the end of the dining hall, the cold November air leaked through the cracks of the towering windows, brushing along my arms. I placed a hand on the doorframe for just a second, not to steady myself, but to acknowledge something quietly monumental. A boundary, perhaps, or the final thread of a rope I'd been gripping for far too long. When I pushed the door open, the soft hum of conversation from the foyer drifted into the silence behind me. Guests in the other room looked up, confused, sensing tension without understanding its source. I didn't stop. I walked past the marble columns, past the oil paintings of grand ancestors glaring down in gilded frames, past the staff, who tried very hard not to meet my eyes. The echo of my footsteps filled the corridor like a heartbeat trying to remember its own rhythm. Outside, the cold hit me fully, sharp, clean, bracing. I welcomed it. The sky above the estate was a deep, ink-washed blue. The kind that only appears on nights when something is ending or beginning. The gravel crunched beneath my heels as I crossed the circular driveway toward my car, the biting air threading through my hair. And though my hands trembled slightly from the sudden drop in temperature, there was a steadiness in my chest that I hadn't felt all evening. Behind me, through the enormous windows, I could feel the weight of every gaze pressed against my back. 25 elite guests, shocked and bewildered, watching the woman they expected to crumble simply walk away instead. Let them watch. Let them wonder. Let them sit in the silence I left behind. I reached my car, opened the door, and exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The sound of the dining room still clung faintly to me, the clatter of that fallen knife, the hush after Vivian's words, but out here, beneath the cold night sky, it all felt strangely distant, as though it belonged to someone else's story. The road was dark and nearly empty as I drove away from the Grant estate, the cold New England night swallowing the last traces of warmth from the house behind me. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, not from fear or lingering humiliation, but from the steady, growing clarity that always came in moments like this. It was the same clarity that had guided me through every storm in my life, from sleeping in the back seat of a rusted Honda at 14 to negotiating with shipping magnates who didn't know the quiet woman across the table controlled more of their future than they could imagine. Half a mile from the estate, I eased the car onto the shoulder of the road, switching the engine to idle. The dashboard light cast a faint blue glow across my hands, steady, calm, unmoved by the chaos I had just walked away from. I inhaled once, deeply, letting the chill from the cracked window fill my lungs. Then I picked up my phone. I didn't have to scroll. I didn't have to search. There was only one person I needed to call. Lena answered on the first ring. She always did. Ava. Her voice sharpened instantly, reading my silence before I even formed a word. What happened? Your location shows you're still near Newport. Did someone say something? Do you want me to? Lena, I said quietly. Get the files. There was a beat of stunned silence on her end, just one, brief, perfect second, of stillness, before she inhaled sharply. You want Plan Indigo? She didn't ask it like a question. She asked it like someone confirming a code phrase she hoped she'd never hear spoken aloud. Yes, I said. This time, the silence stretched to 3 full seconds. I could almost picture her pinching the bridge of her nose in her tiny, cluttered home office, the walls covered in maps and data charts nobody outside our company had ever seen. Ava, she whispered, and in that one word was everything: worry, fear, warning, loyalty. Plan Indigo will cripple Grant Maritime. It will cripple them fast. There's no coming back from it. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, where the faint glow of the estate still shimmered between the trees like a taunt. I know. Their word, a gotade. Then say it, she murmured. Say the reason. Because I need to hear it from you. The cold air brushed along my collarbone. I looked into the rearview mirror, saw the mansion's golden lights shrinking behind me, the same lights that had illuminated Vivian Grant's sneer, as if the universe itself wanted me to see every detail of her contempt. My reflection stared back at me, calm, distant, frighteningly composed. Because they think I'm garbage, I said softly. Because, she looked at me like I was dirt beneath her shoe. And because her entire empire depends on a woman she just called worthless. Lena exhaled, long and slow. Understood. There was no judgment in her voice. Lena never judged me, not for the choices I made, not for the quiet ruthlessness I carried like a second pulse, not for the power I wielded with a precision most people would never even recognize. She had been with me since the very beginning, when blue wave navigation was just a wild idea in a terrified girl's notebook, scribbled between diner shifts and night classes. She was the first person I trusted with the truth. That I wasn't just trying to survive. I was building something that would make the entire industry kneel without ever seeing my face. Are you sure you don't want to sleep on it? Lena asked softly. Push back without destroying them. I closed my eyes, letting her words settle. I knew why she hesitated. Grant Maritime wasn't just another client contrary to what Vivienne believed. They were one of the companies most dependent on Blue Wave's routing algorithms. They had been courting us for months, desperate to secure long-term access. Without it, their aging infrastructure would fail. Their outdated ships would run at dangerous inefficiencies. Their deliveries would lag. Investors would panic. Competitors would smell blood. 48 hours without our system, and they would be on their knees. 72. And the board would revolt. 1 week, and the empire Vivienne worshipped would crumble. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't emotional. It was structural, mathematical. I had built a system so essential, so deeply embedded in the lifeblood of maritime logistics, that removing it was like pulling oxygen from a burning room. Ava, Lena said again, but more gently this time. Talk to me. I opened my eyes, exhaled, and let the truth slide out quiet, clean, razor sharp. She humiliated me in a room full of her peers. She wanted me small. She wanted me silent. She wanted me grateful to be tolerated. I paused, and the next words came out colder than the night air. She wanted me powerless. And you're not, Lena whispered. No, I said. I'm not. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the engine and the distant whisper of the ocean against the shoreline, steady and indifferent, as though the world itself were listening to a shift it could feel but not yet see. I'll activate Indigo, Lena said finally. The notice will go to the Grant legal team within the hour. Suspension of access will begin at midnight. They'll figure out what's happening by morning. Asko is a man. A small, involuntary laugh escaped me, not amused, not triumphant, but disbelieving at the surreal intersection of cruelty and fate. This wasn't supposed to be tonight, I murmured. I didn't plan for any of this. Then let it be tonight, Lena replied. Let it be the night they learn who you really are. I stared into the rearview mirror one last time. The mansion was barely visible now, just a speck of gold swallowed by darkness. Send the files, I said. Begin Indigo. Yes, Ava. And 4 times. And Lena? Yes? I'm done letting people decide my worth. There was a pause, then a soft, fierce whisper. Good. I ended the call. For a moment, the quiet returned. Heavy but strangely liberating, as if a door I had been pressing against for years had finally swung open. Then I pulled back onto the road and drove into the night, not away from something, but toward the truth of who I had always been, hidden beneath a world that never expected me to have a voice, let alone an empire. The highway stretched endlessly ahead of me, dark and slick from the mist rolling in from the ocean. My wipers dragged across the windshield in slow, rhythmic arcs, and with each sweep, the memories I spent years burying rose quietly to the surface, as if tonight had cracked open a vault inside me I hadn't meant to unlock. I wasn't always calm. I wasn't always composed. I wasn't always the woman who could utter the words, activate, plan indigo, without her voice shaking. There was once a version of me who would have shattered under Vivian Grant's sentence. A girl who heard street garbage and believed it. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as the familiar ache settled low in my chest, the kind of ache that wasn't loud, just old scar tissue remembering where the wounds used to be. When I was 12, my father started drinking more than he worked. At 13, he drank more than he slept. And by 14, he drank more than he breathed. I learned quickly how to navigate the creaking floorboards of a house where every step risked waking a man who moved unpredictably between despair, rage, and the dead-eyed stillness of someone already drowning. My mother left one October morning. No note, no explanation, just a hollowed-out apartment and a refrigerator with 3 cartons of expired milk. I waited for her for weeks, sitting by the window, counting headlights on the street, imagining each one slowing down, turning, stopping. But none of them ever did. By December, the landlord changed the locks. That winter, the back seat of my father's old Honda Civic became my bedroom. The trunk became my closet. The glove compartment held the loose change we scavenged from beneath soda machines or behind gas station counters. And the whole car, with its cracked leather seats and broken heater, became the only world I knew. The cold was a living thing that winter. It seeped into my bones, folded into my clothes, clung to me like a second skin. My breath crystallized in front of me each morning, delicate and fleeting, like proof that I existed even in a world that had tried very hard to forget me. When my father passed out, I would slip out of the car quietly and walk 2 miles to a 24-hour diner. The cook, an older man with tired eyes and a name tag that read Lou, would let me wash dishes in exchange for leftover soup and a hot corner near the stove. He never asked questions. I never answered the ones he didn't ask. At 5 in the morning, I would walk to the public library before school opened. They didn't heat the building until sunrise, but there was Wi-Fi. Weak, inconsistent, but real. And with that, I taught myself to code first, with free tutorials on a cracked phone screen, then with borrowed textbooks and outdated manuals I found in the donation bin. I learned Python before I learned how to parallel park. I learned Java before I learned how to braid my own hair. I learned C++ before I learned that not all adults were cruel or tired or broken. I didn't understand shipping lanes yet. I didn't know anything about maritime logistics or global routes or fuel optimization, but I understood patterns, I understood systems, and I understood the quiet thrill of solving problems nobody thought a girl like me had any business touching. It wasn't until I turned 16 and managed to rent a room above a laundromat that I finally had stable access to a computer. The room was cramped and smelled like detergent and steam, but to me, it was a kingdom. I practiced coding until my eyes burned. I devoured anything related to navigation, probability, and systems architecture. When I found a discarded textbook on maritime engineering, something clicked into place, an alignment of 2 entirely different worlds: the chaos of global trade and the precision of machine learning. By 19, I started building the first version of the algorithm that would later become the backbone of blue wave navigation. A system that could predict optimal shipping routes with unprecedented accuracy. A system that could analyze weather patterns, fuel variables, port congestion, and geopolitical risks all in seconds. I was 23 when a small tech outlet wrote a tiny blurb calling my prototype a promising curiosity. I was 26 when Bloomberg called it an industry disruptor. End quote. I was 27 when the first major shipping company quietly implemented it and watched their operating costs drop so dramatically that rivals began sniffing around, desperate to figure out what magic they were missing. Magic, that's what they called it. As if I had conjured the entire system from thin air. They never saw the years inside a cold library. They never saw the nights inside a freezing car. They never saw the 14-year-old girl who sat awake, terrified her unconscious father might freeze to death beside her before morning. And that was fine. Let them believe in magic. Let them believe the myth. Because the truth was simple. I kept myself small on purpose. The world treats small things carelessly, but it also underestimates them. And there is no greater power than being underestimated by the people who believe they own the room. They show their hands. They reveal their arrogance. They expose their vulnerabilities and assume you're too insignificant to notice. It's why Vivian Grant had looked at me tonight with such casual cruelty, because she thought I was small, harmless, easy to break. She had no idea the woman she was speaking to built the system her entire family's empire depended on. She had no idea the dress she mocked wasn't borrowed but custom-tailored, paid for in cash earned from a technology her husband's board was desperate to acquire. She had no idea the girl she called street garbage once slept in the back of a car but now controlled a technological infrastructure so deeply rooted in maritime logistics that removing it would send shockwaves across the industry. And she had absolutely no idea that tonight, quietly, cleanly, without a raised voice or a dramatic scene, her words had finally cut the last string tethering me to her son's world. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. It was nearing midnight. In a few minutes, Plan Indigo would activate, and by sunrise, the Grants would realize something they had never considered possible. The woman they dismissed did not come from nothing. She came from fire. And she had learned to build empires from the ashes. By the time I pulled into the underground garage of my building, the city had already fallen into that late-night hush where everything feels suspended, traffic lights blinking for cars that may never come, the wind threading through the narrow streets like it's carrying secrets nobody else can hear. I cut the engine, resting both hands on the steering wheel for a moment, letting the quiet soak in. It was almost peaceful, almost. Because beneath that silence pulsed the truth I had carried alone for years. The entire maritime world ran on a heartbeat only I controlled. And tonight, the people who believed they were untouchable were about to feel what it meant when that heartbeat stuttered. I checked my phone. 5 messages from Lena. 3 from my legal team. 1 from an unknown number that I didn't need to open to know it came from someone at Grant Maritime. Probably a mid-level executive tasked with making late-night friendly inquiries, trying to figure out why the system had gone dark for their login credentials. They would phrase it politely, of course, a technical issue, an unexpected outage, seeking clarification. But beneath the corporate vocabulary would be unmistakable fear. Because Grant Maritime Logistics was running on fumes. On the surface, their company still looked like a polished empire. Massive ships, gleaming offices, a boardroom full of men who prided themselves on lineage more than innovation. But the industry had changed, and they had not kept up. Their navigation systems were outdated, their risk assessments antiquated, their fuel efficiency laughably poor. They were hemorrhaging money behind closed doors, frantically trying to modernize before their competitors overtook them completely. That was why they wanted Blue Wave, desperately, quietly. Enough to bend every rule of propriety to secure a contract they believed would save them. And ironically, enough to tolerate the woman their matriarch despised because they had no idea she was the one they were negotiating with. To them, I was just Ava, a polite girlfriend, a nobody with a pretty face. An accessory they assumed Elias would grow out of once he matured into the man they envisioned for him. They never connected Ava to Ava Rowan, founder of Rowan Harbor Holdings, the shell company that quietly owned Blue Wave Navigation, the company their entire survival hinged on. I designed it that way. I wanted anonymity. I built layers of holding companies, trusts, and offshore entities so intricate, no boardroom of old money executives could ever untangle them unless I wanted them to. My anonymity was my armor. My invisibility was my advantage. And their arrogance was my weapon. I stepped out of the car, the faint echo of my boots on the concrete reminding me of the hollow echo of silverware on that polished table earlier that night. Vivian Grant had no idea her words were spoken to a woman who owned the kill switch to everything she believed her family had earned. The elevator doors slid open. As I ascended, my phone buzzed again. A voice message from Lena. "Ava," her voice whispered, tense but controlled. Grant Maritime has tried to access the system 4 times. The suspension protocols triggered exactly as expected. They'll receive the formal termination notice by 1 a.m. Their CTO just emailed us asking if this was a glitch. It's starting. I closed my eyes briefly. Good, I whispered to the empty elevator. Because the truth, the devastating, inescapable truth, was that Grant Maritime couldn't survive 48 hours without Blue Wave. They had integrated our routing system into 82% of their active fleet. Their automated port scheduling relied almost entirely on our algorithms. Their fuel optimization calculations? Ours. Their weather risk assessment tools? Ours. Their shipment ETA predictions? Ours. And Vivian, with all her social power and cold elegance, didn't even know she had been dining with the person her entire board spent months begging to meet. She had humiliated the only woman who could keep her empire from collapse. The elevator dinged softly as I reached my floor. The hallway lights flickered on as I walked past them, casting elongated shadows against the marble. My penthouse door unlocked with a click, and the warmth inside washed over me like a reminder that everything I had now, I had built with my own hands. No inheritance, no safety net, no legacy handed to me by people who believed wealth equaled worth. I set my phone on the counter. Almost immediately, it buzzed again. This time, Lena was calling. I answered. Yes? It's happening fast, she said. Too fast. Their internal servers are spiraling. Multiple ships have flagged their navigation dashboards as unstable. Port authorities are requesting updated data feeds. And Grant can't provide them. They're scrambling. Of course they were. My system was designed to operate seamlessly when everything was functioning perfectly, but the moment unauthorized access was detected and the suspension initiated, it didn't just turn off. It withdrew. It froze. It halted all synced calculations across their operational chain, forcing them to rely on outdated manual methods they hadn't used in decades. 48 hours, Lena continued, and they'll be grounded. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. The city lights glittered across the water like scattered diamonds. Out there, thousands of containers moved across the surface of the ocean, each one part of a global choreography that kept entire countries running. And somewhere among those ships were vessels bearing the Grant emblem, vessels now blind, vulnerable, and dangerously human again. How long before they realize it's intentional? I asked softly. They'll know by morning, she said. They may not suspect you, not immediately, but they'll know Blue Wave pulled the plug. A bitter, quiet irony curled at the corner of my mouth. Let them know, I murmured. Let every executive in that boardroom stare at each other and wonder how many people they've underestimated. Let them feel the weight of talking down to the wrong woman. Lena hesitated. Ava, do you want me to send a statement? Something official? I shook my head, though she couldn't see it. No, silence is enough. It's something back, because silence, I had learned long ago, is the most terrifying answer in a world built on power. I ended the call, setting my phone aside. The room around me was still, quiet, expansive. I had designed my life to be like this void of chaos, insulated from old wounds, built entirely on my own terms. And yet tonight, as the first domino fell in the empire that had mocked the girl I once was, I felt nothing like vengeance or triumph. I felt clarity. Grant Maritime was collapsing not because of cruelty, but because of complacency. Because they believed their wealth made them invincible. Because arrogance had eroded their competence. Because a woman at their Thanksgiving table had opened her mouth and revealed exactly what blind privilege sounds like. And because, for the first time in years, I wasn't interested in saving them. I had barely finished brushing my hair when my phone lit up with Elias's name. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, listening to the faint hum of the city outside my windows. I could imagine him pacing somewhere inside the estate, still wearing the same suit from dinner, tie half loosened, eyes red from crying in the driveway. He would be desperate to explain, to apologize, to promise things he had no power to deliver. My chest tightened at the thought, not with anger, but with the kind of sorrow that sits heavy and quiet beneath the ribs. I let it ring until it stopped. 30 seconds later, he called again. And again. And again. By the fourth call, his voice came through in a trembling voicemail, the pain unmistakable even through the digitized crackle. Ava, please answer. I need to talk to you. I need to make this right. Just give me a chance. Please. His voice broke on the last word. I pressed the phone to my forehead, inhaling deeply. Then I placed it face down on the counter. I wasn't avoiding him. I wasn't punishing him. I was protecting myself. Because if I heard him say my name one more time in that broken, pleading whisper, I wasn't sure I'd be able to keep my resolve intact. I turned off the sound. But I didn't turn off the phone. And that turned out to be the only reason I saw what happened next. At 12:11 a.m., the calls started. Unknown number. Then another. Then another. Then 5 more, in the span of a minute. At first, I thought it was Elias again from a different line, maybe using the house phone, maybe using his sister's. But when the 7th call came with the caller ID flashing Grant Maritime Executive Line, I exhaled slowly. So it had begun. Plan Indigo had activated. The suspension was in motion. I let the first call ring out, then the second, then the third. By the fourth, they left a voicemail. Ava, this is Frederick Lang, Chief Operating Officer at Grant Maritime. We're experiencing a critical access issue with the Blue Wave system. It appears your company's servers may have. He paused, as if choosing the right euphemism for cut our legs out from under us. Experienced a malfunction. We'd appreciate your urgent assistance. I deleted it. 2 minutes later, the CFO called. 5 minutes after that, their senior legal counsel, then the head of crisis management, then the CTO. Some were polite. Some were panicked. One, a particularly smug lawyer I'd met once in passing, wasn't even trying to mask his arrogance. Ava, this is an urgent matter. You're associated with the CEO of Blue Wave, correct? We need you to contact him immediately. Your intervention is required. I smiled humorlessly. My intervention. If only he knew. I didn't pick up. I sat on the couch, wrapped in a soft blanket, watching the phone vibrate against the marble table like a trapped insect. Every 30 seconds, a new call. Every 5 minutes, a breathless voicemail. Every hour, more frantic than the last. Around 2 a.m., the first news alert popped up. Breaking. Major shipping firm facing system outage, source claims. Technology suspended. Then another. Unconfirmed reports. Grant Maritime's routing platform down across multiple vessels. Then, port authorities requesting manual updates from Grant ships, delays possible. I leaned back against the sofa cushions, letting the headlines wash over me. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only inevitability. This was always how it would unfold once the Grants mistook me for someone small. Somewhere inside that mansion tonight, Vivian would be sprawled on a velvet chaise, sipping her nightly chamomile tea, utterly unaware that her kingdom was already beginning to burn. But she would feel the heat soon enough, because while she slept peacefully, her board members were waking to flashing alerts, urgent emails, collapsing forecasts, spiraling investments. Ava, I could almost hear Lena saying from earlier, they'll know by morning. They were knowing already. By 3:26 a.m., the calls shifted tone from professional to frantic. The vice president of fleet operations left a voicemail so breathless it sounded like he'd run up 12 flights of stairs. Ava, I apologize for the late hour, but we're having multiple system failures. We need Blue Wave restored immediately. If you have any contact, any at all, with their executive team, please call me back. This is a severe operational emergency. Severe. And this was only the first 3 hours. At 4:02 a.m., I received a message from someone I didn't recognize. Please, we need your help. At 4:47 a.m., 2 vessels are requesting emergency manual clearance. We don't know what's happening. Call us. At 5:13 a.m., we just need access restored. Whatever it costs. I turned the phone face down again. Let them feel the weight of being at the mercy of someone they dismissed. Let them taste humility. Let them finally understand what it meant to depend on an outsider they believed they could insult, diminish, or control. And somewhere between the 10th and 11th hour of missed calls, a new notification blinked onto the screen, one that made me sit up fully. Vivian Grant, 1 missed call. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. Vivian didn't call people. Vivian summoned them. So if she was calling, it meant only one thing. Her board had finally woken her up. And they were panicking. I imagined her sitting upright in her silk pajamas, the glow of her phone washing her face pale as her advisors explained to her that the company she believed she commanded with elegance and pedigree was in freefall. She didn't know why. She didn't know how. But she would. Soon. Because the empire she believed would outlast everyone in that dining room, the empire she thought protected her superiority, was balancing on a precipice she never imagined existed. And the woman she had called garbage was the only one who could save it. I silenced the phone again. Let them fall a little further. Let the truth sharpen before it lands. By dawn, the Grant Mansion would not be a place of luxury, but a war room. And the first crack in their fortress would begin with the thing they valued most: control. And this time, they had absolutely none. Morning sunlight spilled across the harbor like liquid gold, glinting off the ships anchored in the distance. But inside the headquarters of Rowan Harbor Holdings, Blue Wave's true parent company, the air was anything but warm. The tension inside the lobby was almost electric, humming beneath the marble floors and glass walls, a nervous energy that whispered of something catastrophic unfolding behind closed doors. I stepped out of the elevator to the soft chorus of, "Good morning, Miss Rowan," from the front desk team, their voices polite but edged with the slightest tremor. Everyone had heard by now. They knew the gravity of Plan Indigo. They knew silence was intentional, not accidental, and they knew better than to ask questions. But as I walked through the lobby, another voice sliced sharply through the air, high, commanding, gratingly familiar. "I demand to speak to your CEO," Vivian Grant said, her words echoing off the marble like tiny explosions. I stopped mid-step. So she had come herself. A low murmur rippled through the lobby, employees glancing toward the elegantly dressed woman pacing by the reception desk. Vivienne stood rigid in a cream cashmere coat, diamonds flashing at her throat, her perfectly coiffed hair betraying only the slightest unraveling from a sleepless night. But her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were glowing with a thinly masked panic. She hadn't slept. She hadn't recovered. She had come here desperate. I waited, watching from a short distance as the front desk associate explained in her calm, professional tone. "Ma'am, the CEO has several meetings this morning. If you'd like to schedule—" "I don't schedule," Vivian snapped. "I command, and your CEO works for my family, whether he knows it or not. Now get him down here." The associate blinked once, posture tightening like a shield. "Our CEO doesn't work for your family, ma'am," Vivian scoffed. "Everyone works for my family." Asked. Her gaze swept the lobby, dismissive, superior, until they landed on me. The flicker of disdain in her eyes was immediate. "You," she hissed under her breath. "Of course. The little stray shows up to work early." I walked forward, hands loose at my sides, my expression unreadable. Vivienne stepped closer, lowering her voice but not her venom. "I suppose this is where you make yourself useful. Run along and fetch your CEO so the adults can speak." I'm still in his time. For a moment, I simply looked at her, really looked at her. The flawless makeup failing to hide her exhaustion, the stiff posture masking a night of panic, the arrogance acting as armor over the fear she didn't yet understand. She thought she stood on high ground. She thought she was still in control. I didn't offer a reaction. Not a flinch. Not a frown. Not even a raised brow. Silence itself became the response. Vivienne smirked, misinterpreting it entirely. "Oh, don't pout. I'm sure someone like you is used to errands. Fetch the CEO or a manager or whoever ranks above you." Internally, I exhaled a slow, steady breath. Not to calm myself, there was nothing to calm, but to savor the moment, because the insults, the condescension, the performance of power was the very last residue of a world she was losing by the hour. and this would be the last time she ever spoke to me like this. But I didn't reveal the truth. Not yet. Instead, I gave her something far more unsettling. I smiled. Soft, knowing, almost sympathetic. Vivienne bristled. Wipe that smirk off your face. This is serious. Oh, I said gently. Much more serious than you realize. Before she could retort, the elevator behind me chimed again. The doors opened. Several executives stepped out. And the moment they saw me, all of them straightened. Good morning, Miss Rowan, one said, nodding respectfully. Another. We have the reports ready for your review. A third. The board is assembled in Conference Hall A. They're waiting for you. Vivienne froze. Her eyes darted from them, bowed heads, deferential tones back to me. Her lips parted slightly. Miss Rowan? I watched her mind race, watched her stitch together pieces she had never looked at closely enough to understand. Rowan Harbor Holdings, Blue Wave Navigation, the quiet CEO who never attended public events, the shadow behind an empire her own family depended on. Me. I took a step forward, meeting her eyes with the same calm she had mistaken for submission the night before. Vivienne, I said, my voice level, cold, steady. Come with me. She looked like someone who had just stepped into oncoming traffic without realizing it. I led her through the corridor, past glass-walled offices where employees cast curious glances, sensing the shift in the air. Vivienne followed stiffly, no longer barking orders, no longer gliding with her usual effortless superiority. The ground beneath her was unstable now, and she felt it. When we reached the executive wing, I opened the door to Conference Room C, a spacious chamber with panoramic harbor views and a long obsidian table polished to a perfect mirror. I stepped inside. Vivienne followed. The door closed behind us with a soft click. Sit, I said. She blinked. Excuse me? You wanted to speak to the CEO. Sit. There was no room for argument in my voice, not a single crack of negotiation. And something in her finally recognized it. Slowly, she sat. I remained standing, not out of superiority but because I wanted her to feel the imbalance she had forced on me at dinner the night before. Except this time, it wasn't cruelty. It was truth asserting itself. You have 5 minutes, I said. Use them. Her throat tightened as she swallowed. Her voice, when it finally emerged, was thin. I came to apologize. For what? I asked quietly. Her eyes darted away. For the things I said last night. If they hurt you. My laugh was soft, restrained, echoing faintly across the glass. Not if, Vivienne. They did. She inhaled sharply, as if the precision of that sentence sliced something open in her. Yes, she admitted, voice trembling in a way I hadn't heard before. They did. She clasped her hands together, knuckles white. And I am sorry. I let silence hang between us, not to punish her, but to let the weight of her words settle. Then I walked to the head of the table and placed both hands on the cool surface. Vivienne, I said, each word sharp and deliberate. What you said last night didn't reveal who I am, it revealed who you are. She flinched. You thought I was small. You thought I was powerless. You thought I was someone you could dismiss with a single sentence and suffer no consequences. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. And that is exactly why Blue Wave can never fall into the hands of people like you. She stared at me, breathing unevenly. Why? Why are you doing this? You're destroying us. I'm not destroying anything, I replied. I'm refusing to save you. Her lips parted. You could fix this. I could, I said. But I won't. She stood suddenly, palms slamming on the table. You're condemning hundreds of employees. Families. My son. Your son, I cut in, is the only reason I tolerated your presence this long. Vivienne froze. And, ironically, I continued, your son is the only reason your company isn't already ashes in the water. Her breath hitched. I stepped away from the table, circling her slowly, not out of malice but out of precision, like a surgeon examining the limits of a failing organ. I'm not here to avenge myself, I said. I'm here to protect an industry from families who care more about legacy than innovation, who care more about status than safety, who care more about pedigree than competence. I stopped in front of her. I'm here to protect it from people like you. Her expression crumbled, shock, fear, confusion, warring all at once. She finally understood. This wasn't personal revenge. This was structural accountability. You have 3 minutes left, I said quietly. If you have anything honest to say, now is the time. Vivian's jaw trembled. Her voice came out hoarse, stripped of pride. Please, don't do this. But the empire had already begun to fall. And it wasn't falling because of me. It was falling because someone finally told it the truth. And that someone was the woman it tried to bury. Vivian stood there, trembling, her breath sharp and uneven, like a woman realizing the ground beneath her had already collapsed, and she was only now feeling the fall. For the first time since I had known her, she looked small not because her wealth had vanished, not because her authority had been challenged, but because the armor she had worn her entire life had cracked under the weight of her own arrogance. She pressed her palms to the table as if needing it to stay upright. Then, her voice, thin, frayed, desperate, broke the silence. Please, she whispered. If you destroy Grant Maritime, Elias will lose everything. The words hung in the air like a final plea, trembling, brittle, clinging to the last shred of power she believed she still possessed. But I heard something else beneath them, not love, not concern, but the unmistakable note of someone who finally understood she could no longer hide behind her son's future. Someone who realized that every dynasty, no matter how gilded, can crumble from the inside when its foundations are built on entitlement instead of merit. I exhaled slowly, letting her desperation settle before I responded. Elias, I said, is the only one of you I'm not worried about. She jerked her head upward, confusion tightening her brow. What? Your son, I repeated calmly, is brilliant, capable, kind. He doesn't need an empire handed to him. He doesn't need legacy or inheritance to survive. He has potential, more potential than you've ever given him credit for. Vivian's lips parted, her expression flickering with something raw, something painful. Maybe pride, maybe shame, maybe the dawning realization that she had never truly seen her own son. But without the company, without the Grant name, I cut in gently but firmly. Elias can finally find out who he is, not who you require him to be. Action. She stared at me as if the concept itself was foreign. Perhaps it was. People like Vivienne built their worlds on lineage, on control, on the belief that a family name was the only currency that mattered. They raised their children in the shadows of expectations so rigid that individuality became a flaw rather than a strength. They didn't understand growth unless it aligned with legacy. They didn't understand love unless it reinforced hierarchy. But I had learned my lessons in the backseat of a cold car, in diners with flickering lights, in libraries that became sanctuaries when the world gave me nothing else. I understood something Vivienne never had to learn. Self-worth built from ashes is stronger than any inheritance. I straightened my shoulders, meeting her gaze head-on. I'm not here to take anything from Elias, I said. I'm here to stop enabling a company that hides incompetence behind its family crest. A company that uses its power to suppress innovation. A company that believes it deserves to survive simply because its name has existed for generations. Her throat worked as she swallowed. You don't understand, this is bigger than you. Than me. Hundreds of employees. And they will be fine, I said, my voice still calm, still steady, but edged with truth sharp enough to cut. Because the people who actually keep your company running, the engineers, the managers, the crews at each port are competent. They deserve leadership that matches their dedication. Leadership that doesn't rely on outdated systems and inherited arrogance. She stared at me as though seeing the world skew sideways. So this is personal, she whispered. No. The words slipped from my lips like steel. And then, this is principled. Generalities. Vivienne blinked, tears gathering at the edge of her eyes, not the dramatic tears of someone seeking sympathy, but the stunned, involuntary tears of a woman confronting a truth she had never been forced to acknowledge. "I'm not doing this because you insulted me," I said quietly. "I'm doing this because your entire company is built on the same belief that allowed you to insult me. You think birthright equals competence. You think money equals worth. You think power is a family heirloom instead of something earned." I leaned closer, not intimidating, just resolute. "And the world cannot afford companies that operate like that anymore." Her voice cracked. "You're punishing me." "I'm liberating the industry," I said. "I'm refusing to hand the future of global logistics to a family that treats people like disposable pieces. I'm protecting the workers you never think about, the ports you neglect, the routes your executives ignore, the safety protocols you cut because you assume nothing bad ever happens to people like you." Vivienne pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes glassy. "And Elias?" she croaked. "What happens to him?" "He gets to find himself," I answered softly. "Away from your shadow." A long silence stretched between us, fragile and heavy. I watched the realization unfurl inside her, slow, painful, inevitable. This wasn't vengeance. This wasn't spite. This wasn't emotional retaliation from a woman who had been humiliated. This was justice. Not legal justice. Not social justice. But structural justice, the kind that corrects an imbalance long overdue. "You think he'll forgive you?" she whispered. "I'm not asking for his forgiveness," I replied. "I'm trusting his strength." She stared down at her trembling hands, watching the perfection of her world slip through her fingers. For the first time, Vivienne Grant didn't look like a queen on a throne. She looked like a woman confronted by the truth that she had mistaken cruelty for protection, elitism for legacy, intimidation for leadership. "Elias deserves better than this family's expectations," I said. "He deserves better than a future decided by your fear. He deserves better than a company drowning beneath the weight of old money that refuses to grow." Vivienne slowly lifted her gaze. "And what do you deserve?" she whispered. The answer came easily. "Respect," I said. "Not because of who I was born to, but because of who I became." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They settled into the room with the gravity of something absolute. Vivienne's face crumpled, not in defeat, but in the dawning understanding that she had never once treated her son, or her employees, or even herself, with that same measure of dignity. And in that moment, I knew she finally understood. I wasn't ending Grant Maritime out of revenge. I was ending the illusion that had kept them blind. And for the first time, Vivienne Grant had nothing left to hide behind. The sun had dipped low by the time I returned to my penthouse, the harbor outside tinted in the soft amber hues of late afternoon. The world looked deceptively calm, sailboats rocking gently, gulls circling lazily above the docks, the city humming in its usual rhythm as though nothing beneath its polished surface had shifted. But everything had shifted. By now, every major shipping analyst in the country was speculating about the catastrophic system outage at Grant Maritime. Journalists were gathering outside their headquarters. Investors were demanding explanations. The empire Vivienne guarded with iron poise was unraveling thread by thread, each consequence a quiet echo of decisions she never believed had consequences. I set my keys on the counter and exhaled deeply. My body felt drained not from regret, but from the sheer emotional weight of what the past 24 hours had forced into the open. I wasn't sure how long I stood there in the quiet stillness of my home before I heard the knock on my door. 3 short taps, then silence. My breath caught. I knew that rhythm. I crossed the room slowly, my pulse thudding with an unsteady, reluctant hope. When I opened the door, Elias stood there, not the broken, tear-stricken version of him I had left standing in that driveway, but someone different. Someone steadier. Someone who looked like he had been forced to examine himself in the harsh mirror of his family's collapse and had chosen, finally, to step out of the reflection. He wasn't crying. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't begging. He simply looked at me with a kind of resolute sorrow, the kind that comes from truths long avoided finally claiming their space. "Ava," he said quietly. I stepped aside without speaking, letting him in. He walked to the center of my living room, stopping near the window overlooking the harbor. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The silence felt like a living thing between us, fragile, suspended, waiting. Then he inhaled shakily and turned to face me fully. "If I have to choose," he said, voice steady, "between my mother and the woman who has actual integrity, I choose integrity." The words hung in the air, simple, unadorned, devastatingly honest. I felt something inside me soften and twist all at once. "Elias." "No," he said, raising a hand gently. "Let me finish." He exhaled, shoulders rising and falling, as though he were shedding years of quiet compliance. "My entire life," he continued, "I've watched my mother dictate what strength is, what success is, what love is. And I believed her, because it was easier, because it kept the peace, because I thought keeping quiet meant keeping the family intact." He looked down at his hands, hands that had always been gentle with me, careful, apologetic for wounds he hadn't inflicted. "But last night, watching her humiliate you in front of all those people, watching myself stand there and do nothing." His voice cracked, not with tears, but with shame. That was the moment I realized silence isn't peace, it's complicity. I felt a sting behind my ribs. I had waited, not consciously, but deep inside myself, for him to say these words. For him to see what his family's world had done to him. Not just to me. He lifted his gaze again, and this time there was fire behind it. "I left the board this morning." My breath hitched. "You... what?" "I resigned." He said it without hesitation. "Not for you, not to win you back, but because I can't be part of something built on arrogance and denial anymore. I can't keep pretending I don't see the harm my family causes inside the company, inside the industry, even inside our own home." He took a step toward me. "I'm not leaving them because of you," he said softly. "I'm leaving because of me. Because I'm ashamed of how long I stayed silent. Ashamed of how long I let my mother define my choices." I felt the room tilt a little, not from dizziness, but from the sudden shift in gravity. Elias Grant, who had spent his whole life molded by legacy, stepping out of that mold on his own terms, it was something I hadn't dared to hope for. But part of me still resisted. Not out of doubt in him, but out of fear that he was sacrificing too much. "Elias," I whispered, "you don't have to cut ties with your family because of me." He studied my face, his expression softening. "Ava," he murmured, "I'm not cutting ties because of you. I'm cutting ties because I finally saw what my silence cost. You didn't make me leave." He placed a hand over his chest. "I left because the man I want to be can't exist under their roof." My throat tightened. He stepped closer, closing the final feet between us. "Let me ask you one thing," he said, voice low, earnest. "Not as a Grant. Not as someone who grew up with everything handed to him. But as a man who wants to build something real." I couldn't speak. I nodded. He took my hands in his, holding them gently. "Let me rebuild my life beside you," he said. "Not with my family's money, not with their influence, just me, my choices, my work, my integrity." 2. Ever 7. A slow breath left my lungs, filled with the weight of all the years I'd spent believing I would always walk alone. My voice came out softer than I intended. "Are you sure? Walking away from them means walking into a world you've never been in, one where you stand on your own." He smiled, small, quiet, but impossibly sincere. "Ava, for the first time, I think that's exactly what I want." Ensured. We stood there in the fading light, our hands intertwined, the world outside shifting toward a future neither of us could predict, but both of us finally chose freely. And in that moment, I understood something with absolute clarity. I hadn't lost him. He had found himself. And that made all the difference. 6 months later, the harbor looked different, cleaner, brighter, almost renewed. The old shipping lanes had shifted, new companies had risen in the wake of collapsing giants, and the air carried the unmistakable hum of an industry reinventing itself. From the balcony of my penthouse, I watched the container ships move like silent silhouettes across the water. Their paths glided smoothly now. no longer tethered to empires that believed tradition could outmuscle innovation. The world had changed. And so had we. Vivienne Grant's fall from grace had been quieter than anyone expected. There were no dramatic press conferences, no heated public statements, no vengeful speeches. Just a single unanimous vote during an emergency board meeting, a closed-door decision that stripped her of the chairwoman title she had inherited, guarded, and weaponized for decades. They cited negligence, failure to manage technological risk, and critical decision-making blind spots. But everyone knew the truth. She had built her legacy on pedestal-high arrogance, and the world had finally stopped applauding. The board replaced her with someone competent, a woman in her 40s with a background in maritime engineering and none of the Grant family's entitlement. And though the company stayed afloat, it never recovered its former scale. Grant Maritime eventually merged with a smaller, more agile logistics firm headquartered in Portland. Their ships returned to sea with new navigation systems, new branding, and a new philosophy. It wasn't a downfall so much as a once booming empire curling inward, humbled into irrelevance. Quietly, inevitably, and by its own hand. Elias never looked back. He left the boardroom that morning with the same calm resolve he had brought to my door 6 months earlier. No dramatic exit, no shouting match, no final confrontation, just a simple, steady decision. I'm done. His resignation rippled through the Grant household like a shockwave. His sister called it betrayal. His mother called it foolishness. His uncles called it a phase. But Elias didn't flinch. He rented a small office near the waterfront, a far cry from the marble halls of the Grant estate, and founded a startup specializing in transparent, ethical logistics. No backdoor bribery. No cost-cutting safety violations. No inherited dominance. Just clean operations, fair practices, and genuine accountability. He named the company Harbor Line. The first time I stepped into his new office, there were only 3 desks, 2 whiteboards crowded with messy handwriting, and a coffee maker that sputtered more steam than coffee. But Elias stood in the middle of it all, like he had finally taken his first real breath, and maybe he had. I became his silent mentor, not in the shadows, but from the edges. I reviewed his business proposals late at night, leaving small notes in the margins. I introduced him to advisors I trusted. I steered him away from dangerous shortcuts and toward sustainable paths. But I never intervened, never dictated. Because this was his journey, not mine. And he deserved to build something with his own hands, unshackled from the weight of the Grant name. Watching him grow, truly grow, was healing in a way I never expected. Meanwhile, Blue Wave flourished. The industry now understood the difference between innovation and inheritance, and the demand for precision had never been higher. Profits soared. But I didn't celebrate with new yachts or penthouses or jewels. I poured the money into something I had once needed desperately but never received. A foundation. The Rowan Fund for Rising Women. A platform dedicated to scholarships, housing assistance, career mentorship, and seed capital for girls who had grown up like I did, girls told they were nothing, girls dismissed because of zip codes and last names, girls who learned early that being underestimated could either break you or forge you into something unshakable. I wanted them to choose the latter. I wanted them to know they had a place even if the world tried to deny it. Every time a young woman wrote to tell me she'd been accepted into an engineering school, or launched her own small business, or simply moved out of a toxic home into her first safe apartment, I felt something inside me mend a little more. I was building something bigger than revenge, bigger than profit, bigger than the past. I was building a home. Not a house. A home. One afternoon, as the soft spring breeze drifted through my balcony doors, Elias joined me, leaning against the railing beside me. His hair was longer now, curly and wind-tousled from spending most days at ports and warehouses instead of banquets and boardrooms. His eyes carried less weight. His smile came easier. He slid an arm around my waist. "Your fund helped another girl today." I leaned into him. "Which one?" "Nina. The one from Tacoma. She just got her pilot internship." "Actually from?" A soft laugh escaped me. "Good. She deserves more than the world ever gave her." Elias pressed a kiss to my temple. "You give people things nobody ever gave you." I looked out toward the water. watching the ships steady themselves against the horizon. Maybe that's why it matters. For a long moment, we stood together in the fading light, not speaking, not rushing, just existing in the quiet certainty that we had both chosen new lives, not perfect ones, not easy ones, but honest ones. Eventually, I exhaled a long breath I didn't even know I'd been holding. I walked away from that dinner because they never saw me as family, I said softly. But now, I have a home where I don't have to ask anyone for a place. Elias tightened his hold around me. You built it, he murmured. You earned it. I let the words settle, warm and grounding. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the harbor in soft twilight, I whispered the truth that had waited years to be spoken. And the empire that sneered at me fell exactly the way all rotten empires do, quietly, inevitably, and by its own hand.